All right, God is great. Let's call Isaiah chapter 5 Still. And maybe subtitle it the DSM for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, a term that counselors will sometimes use for the Bible of psychology used to diagnose, among other things, character disturbance. And a momentary aside for those in ministry, this book or this chapter can function as a kind of diagnostic and statistical manual of some things you are likely to find either in ministry or in the community surrounding the churches or the places in which you minister. That's at least some of the things I've found over the years as I've looked at this particular chapter, which more famously talks about God describing Judah as his garden, a garden that has produced bad fruit. The first half of the chapter, first portion of the chapter, describing it as a garden. The second half describing some of its fruit in the form of woes that he is pronouncing on those that are producing the toxic fruit that has made Judah toxic as a nation that he is warning them will soon be taken off into captivity. In this chapter that starts out, as we mentioned, in verses 1 through roughly 7, describing them as a garden, most notably in verses 4 and 8, talking about, once again, that theme that we will not be saved on our own terms, breaking it down this way. God looked for this, but they produced that. He's going to say that in verse 4 and verse 8. And in the meantime, he's going to take us back to a theme that we have seen before, talking about the ways in which their refusal to acknowledge the wrongs that they are doing is moving him to remove all kinds of protections and comforts for a nation in which, once again, most seem to hunger and thirst for their own way. Thus, the woes in the second part of the chapter, or what reads like a DSM's list for the triple or three characteristics that are sometimes described as common to character disturbance, that being a sense of entitlement, habitual dishonesty, and a lack of empathy. Verses 8 through 10, possibly describing the kind of entitlement represented by what we call conspicuous consumption, buying more than you could ever possibly use, this time in the form of land. Not so much as investment properties, but properties purchased in a way that crowd out those who could possibly make good use of them. Possibly reminiscent of Jesus' story regarding the rich man and Lazarus. The next woe directed at those who party much but know little, and not just about any random facts, but who are neglecting the knowledge of basic human decency, right and wrong. Verses 11 through 16 describing the way in which that lack of knowledge may actually open the door to our next diagnostic symptom, that being dishonesty, as verses roughly 18 through, 21 describe three types or characteristics of dishonesty. The first in a famous quote, verse 18, saying, "Woe to those who draw iniquity with cords of falsehood, who draw sin as with cart ropes," making dishonesty as sort of a go-to move. In contrast, Jesus will describe us when we are at our best as the salt of the earth, salt being that thing that you put on food, all types of food, to give it its flavor. On the other hand, this seems to describe the way in which dishonesty or spin seasons the schemes of those who feel entitled to do life without regard for the ways in which they may harm others. Verse 20 going on to talk about those who seem to be dishonest in this way. "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter," reminding me at least of the way in which McDonald's took a burger joint and scaled it into a national franchise. Likewise, it seems that they are taking personal dishonesty and scaling it into, or franchising it into, something that allows them to pretty much do wrong wherever they go, because they become successful at making the standards for integrity flexible. Which leads into the next woe in verse 21, which reads, "Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and shrewd in their own sight," falling into the classic trap of forgetting that no matter how wise we are, it will not get us out of God's days of judgment, what Isaiah is taking so much time to warn us about in these chapters, as The last woe may demonstrate a lack of empathy when verses 22 and 23 say, "Woe to those who are heroes at drinking wine and valiant men in mixing strong drink, who acquit the guilty for a bribe and deprive the innocent of his right," doing whatever they want without regard to the ways in which twisting justice harms others. These woes helping us further understand the way in which their self-indulgence has made them either unwilling or unable to understand the ways in which their success has come at an unnecessary cost. Verse 25 reading, "Therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against his people, and he stretched out his hand against them and struck them, and the mountains quaked. And their corpses were as refuse in the midst of the streets. For all this his anger has not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still." Thus the title. A phrase that in a great number of the following chapters will describe the way in which God will continue to have his hand outstretched against Judah as they continually fail to connect the dots between their decline and God's final judgment.